Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and the other day I had someone ask me something in the comments of my Q&A thread, and it's something that I've more or less said in my own training clips lately, and it has to do with the idea that dynamic effort work, which also includes even like weighted jumps and plyometrics, really for most athletes and lifters can replace cleans and snatches, and really for the reason that we do them, they're a better alternative. And when I say that, I'm not talking about for people who are going to be weightlifters, and weightlifters meaning people who are going to compete in Olympic lifting, because those are sport-specific training for them. In other words, they have to clean and snatch as part of their actual competition. So if you have to do a highly technical movement as part of your competition, you have to train it. You have to develop technical proficiency at it and become good at it. And no one disagrees with that. At least no reasonable person would disagree with that. But the point we come over to is that you'll see a lot of coaches out there for decades have, and rightly so, have utilized the clean and the snatch, at least the power clean and the power snatch. Not necessarily the full clean and things like that, because those are far more difficult to learn. They've utilized them for athletes as a tool to develop rate of force production. And what they do with that is not so much to just develop explosiveness, so much as to bring out your full genetic potential for explosiveness. And this is generally considered to be useful for most athletes. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about someone who's going to be a power lifter or a field athlete. But anyone that needs a power component to their performance generally has done this form of training. And what do I mean by someone who needs power? How about a football player? Someone who needs to be able to hit you hard out on a playing field. How about a sprinter? Yeah, they need to be explosive. How about a kickboxer or a martial artist? Or even a boxer? What about shot putters? Or anyone who's got to jump? Any of those things. Anyone who needs to sprint, jump, or hit another person out on a playing field of some type in a contact sport. Power is one of the most valuable performance elements that you can develop. It is extremely valuable in all those environments. And we have found that classic barbell lifts do a pretty good job of doing that. And this has been known for decades. So there's a reason the power clean and the power snatch are very heavily utilized in athletics. And I'm not saying that they're wrong when I say that we have better alternatives. It's just that we've come to realize in the modern world that we have alternatives to these things that can work potentially better, but not just better, but are also easier to learn and easier to train. And that's where we get into stuff like speed squats, speed pulls, all of that. When you look at them, a box squat is a very, very easy exercise to teach. Now, it's not easy to teach long distance because you can't get people to sit onto a box, right? It's impossible almost to get someone long distance to tell them to squat onto a 12-inch box, to get that person onto a 12-inch box. To them, 12 inches means 18 inches, it means 20 inches. And it basically means a bench. They'll sit onto an 18-inch bench, and it will not do the same thing. But if you can physically get a person to sit onto the box, you can train someone in one training session in person to box squat correctly. And if you can teach someone to box squat correctly, you can teach them how to speed box. And when we look at the research that's been done on squats, what do we know? We know that the box squat has the highest rate of force production. Not only that, it's extremely easy to recover from. And that's if we do it in the normal manner. Well, what happens when we start utilizing things like accommodating resistance, which is being displayed with change with what I'm doing here? Accommodation means there's contrast weight. In other words, we make the weight heavier at the easiest part, the top, and we make it lighter at the bottom, right? That creates a different force curve. That can improve explosive training. And change is the most simple way because that's simply a change in weight. In other words, the chains are like individual weight plates. Each little link in the chain weighs so many ounces or so many grams, and it just adds to the weight as it goes up. It's also, an example would be bands, which are also used for speed work. And bands have their own explosive component that is completely different. They have their own unique effect in the body because they have the ability to create things like overspeed eccentrics, which can also create a larger stretch reflex. And we start getting into training with bands on stuff like box squats or with speed pulls with the sumo deadlifts. And we get into some tools that are extremely valuable for developing force production. And the same thing that we get out of, say, a snatch, we're getting it out of a speed pull, like a speed pull against chains or bands in a sumo stance. That's going to give you the same explosive benefits you really want from doing something like a power snatch. And what people need to realize is that when we take these wide stance exercises like this and you look at the muscles involved, that actually carries over to a lot of the unilateral training that field athletes do, because it forces you to have more balanced loading because you can't use compensatory strength as much. You have to spread your feet further apart. It actually can train you to do things where you have to pivot and side shift and generate that force to side load. It trains those elements also. And when you're doing so in an explosive environment, like a sumo deadlift or a box squat with a wide stance, again, we're training these explosive elements that we want. We train these elements that we want, and you look at them of how easy they are to learn. We could argue that the sumo deadlift is more complicated to learn than the box squat. The sumo deadlift does have a degree of complexity to it, but the box squat is easy to teach. And if you can teach someone to box squat, the box squat will actually train the sumo deadlift. In other words, if I took someone and taught them how to box squat for 6 weeks and they've never done a sumo deadlift, there is almost no learning curve to the sumo deadlift. You can walk over and take them from a wide stance box squat to a sumo deadlift, and within one training session, you can have them doing it perfectly because the movement pattern carries over tremendously. So it's easy to coach these things. How easy is it to coach a power clean or a power snatch? It's not. It could take weeks or even months, and in some cases years. If you want to get highly technical, it could take years to master them. So you have to look at that in terms of training and coaching an athlete or a lifter to do these lifts. There's a very, very steep learning curve to learning how to power clean. There's a very steep learning curve to learning how to power snatch. And if you're wasting months teaching these people how to do these exercises correctly so that they, number one, don't get injured, number two, can get the explosive benefits because they're not just muscling the weight up, how much training time have you lost? So let's say it takes you 4 full months to teach someone how to power clean correctly and efficiently. How many speed box sessions could you have done against bands or chains in that same amount of time? Even if you did one session every week, that's 16 sessions which this athlete could have been using to develop maximum explosiveness on an exercise that is arguably, because once you throw bands over the box squat, the clean and snatch cannot compete with it in terms of rate of force to development. They can't compete. It's a superior exercise all the way across there. You could have gotten 16 training sessions of that superior exercise in the time you were learning how to do the other one correctly. What's going to build a better athlete faster? And let's talk about injury risk. There is an inherent degree of injury risk, especially with a big, strong athlete doing those movements. There's certainly a degree of risk. Poorly executed cleans hurt a lot of lifters, don't they? You don't get hurt that easy from a properly executed box squat. Once you learn how to box squat, as long as you learn how to not slam onto the box, it's pretty well done. And when we're doing it for dynamic work, we're not using a heavy weight. We're usually using something in the range of 50% of our max. And then we use bands and chains to add additional at the top. But it's relatively light. Same thing with a speed pull. A sumo deadlift, especially with speed work like that, when you're working with relatively light weights, like look at me, I only have 315 on the floor. That's nothing for me. That's a low risk exercise. It's a low risk exercise. These are lower risks than the clean and the snatch. Easier to learn. They bring more to the table. These are pure power exercises without having the same degree of technical component required. What happens when we utilize what you guys saw me doing at the start of this, where you start doing box jumps and plyometrics on top of it? I mean, you want rate of force to development, learn how to jump up onto a box while holding a weight or wearing a loaded vest. Combine that with speed squats, speed pulls. All right, you have the ability to develop very explosive athletes, and these are not difficult exercises to master from a technical perspective. So these are exercises that you can teach someone to do very, very quickly, and how to do them perfectly, because again, we're not using max weights here. You could take a novice field athlete who's only been lifting weights a couple of weeks, and you could immediately rotate them into cycles of speed work on these things. You can immediately rotate them into box jumps, speed pulls, speed boxes. All of this stuff, you can start getting people explosive immediately with minimal learning curve. These are superior training tools. Absolutely superior training tools for developing speed and power and rate of force production. Right, utilize them. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.